And our question, our mandate was, could we identify whether there was a DNA or some sort of blueprint on why some projects, some investment opportunities failed and others succeeded, even if they were in the same sector or the same geography.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the How to Scale a Business podcast. My name is Hector Santiesteban, and I am your host for today. Our special guest is Mr. Sean Penrith. He is the CEO of Gordian Knot Strategies, and among other things, with climate and finance, and I'm sure we'll get into that amidst all the other sort of projects and businesses that you have your hands in. So, Sean, thanks for hanging out and spending some time with us today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
I know I'm sure it's probably a tough question for you to answer, but when people do ask, what do? You can kind of give a straightforward answer, or you can kind of give, maybe the answer that you believe in your heart of hearts. What is an answer to sort of that question?
Yeah, the short answer is we mobilize capital to affect impactful climate solutions.
I would imagine it's probably always been an important topic, but it seems to be, something that is getting more awareness and getting more attention. Maybe not as much as you would hope, but to give us maybe the highlights of how you got into that sort of industry and business, and why that sort of became not the sum of your life's works, but at least takes up a big part of it.
Yeah, well, first, a quick note on the popularity of the job description that I have. It is true, 5 years ago, when I said to people, I founded and run a climate finance consultancy, they would say, what's that? They would literally, very few people understood it. Fortunately, the term climate finance is becoming more commonplace. In terms of the description as to how I ended up, the short story is I sailed across the Atlantic and went around Cape Horn and returned back to Argentina, where I had a business with a very good South American friend of mine. And it was a very lucrative business. It was South America. It was kind of loose and fast, I would say. And I got to a point where I got nervous when the telephone rang. It wasn't that we were doing anything illegally, I just want to be clear, but it just didn't feel meaningful. While the money was great, I suppose there wasn't a real purpose behind it, even though it was nice at that moment to have the resources. And so I decided to return home to South Africa to do my MBA. And I started a business, a glass recycling business, which we ended up having 3 factories, one in South Africa, one in Europe, one in America. It was the recycling business that set me on this path of essentially being a responsible citizen. And I sold that business and moved to Portland, Oregon, where I got into energy efficiency, high performance green buildings, and then into climate, then into the carbon space, then into the impact investing space. And the reason I kept pursuing it was because it felt like it was purposeful. I think that was a very key thing for me, where when the telephone rang, I didn't jolt. I was actually keen to see who was giving me a call. And so there was a very nice alignment between the impact I was seeking to contribute and the sector that needed help. So it's a very far cry from what I was doing back in Buenos Aires in the 90s.
One of the big, let's call it, challenges that I think a lot of businesses run into, and a lot of business leaders, is finding that alignment between what drives them and sort of what is viable in the marketplace. When you were looking at different options, or when you were sort of sunsetting this other business in South America, what was your thought process in determining that, yes, this fed your purpose, but it also was something that could be profitable as well?
That's a really good question. So I've had 9 different businesses. I would say pretty much hands down, each one of them has been driven by the need to solve a particular issue. And my thought process, so we have a functional beverage company, for example, as well as climate finance. I started 2 businesses in the same year in 2018. And I'll use that as an example because it typifies sort of how I approach things. I practice yoga, power vinyasa, and I was doing it consistently, have been doing it consistently, but I kept on losing muscle mass. So I figured, okay, I need to supplement with protein, try to go and find clean protein out there. It's a nightmare, as you know. Everything's got non-pronounceable ingredients, all sorts of sugars. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I can't be the only person who's looking for a functional, clean product. At that time in 2018, at least, there wasn't anything. So I was like, well, we'll start a business. And so we started Mindful Proteins. Our first beachhead product is a Tartu protein water, which you drink after your workout. It's great for muscle recovery. And so I would say that is how I've approached the businesses. It's solve the need and then structure a business model around it that makes sense.
I think that that's sort of the thing that connects and unites all businesses, is that essentially, at least the good ones are the ones that last. They're all out there looking to solve problems, and then it comes downstream from there. In the 9 that you started, and also in some of the firms that you advise, is there sort of a framework, or is there sort of a foundation, a key set of things that in your head all the businesses break down to, and you sort of can either classify them to this, or it's an order of operations to sort of, it's a process and a system that sort of fixes the business regardless of the industry or product that they're providing?
Yeah. I've actually spent a number of years on this very topic. Your question's interesting. I'll tell you why. So several years ago, we conducted research. We were funded by the Walton Family Foundation and contracted by Conservation Finance Network. And our mandate was, could we identify whether there was a DNA or some sort of blueprint on why some projects, some investment opportunities failed and others succeeded, even if they were in the same sector or the same geography? Why was this the case? And I was very excited to take on this project because I realized that us examining these projects that had received impact funding, I wanted to crack that nut to see if there was a pattern. But I was also very interested because I knew potentially that if there was one, there might be a broader application to businesses in general. So we spent a year doing the research, interviewing the project teams, reading all the progress reports, trying to figure out. Like, we mapped all the metrics. We were highly caffeinated for 12 months. And in the end, we actually did discover there was a pattern, which we boiled down to a very powerful framework that consists of 7 elements. When we finished it, we released a white paper, and I started using this framework with our clients, our impact investing clients. Now, just for framing, these are impact clients that want to deploy capital responsibly, and they want to make sure that their capital is delivering both impact and returns. Okay, so this isn't concessionary investing. They actually want, market rate returns. And so we use this framework, predictive analytic framework, to help them identify which were the winners and which were the potential duds, so that they focus their due diligence on the optimally positioned projects. It has proved to be very successful. We now turned it into an online platform called Traro. But here's the fascinating thing. So while it worked in the project context, I started looking at businesses, because a lot of our clients don't always want to invest in a climate solution project per se. They actually want to invest in a business that's doing something. It's either a climate tech business, a measurement, reporting, and verification business, a ratings business, whatever. And so when our clients came to us and said, can you give us a sort of a perspective on company A, B, and C? I used this framework to determine whether or not I thought whether I could give them a recommendation. So that's a long answer to your question. But the truth is, yes, the 7 elements are, the first element is the problem that they're attempting to solve. Is it widely recognized? Is this systemic? And is it a scalable problem to solve? So lots of times we find a solution in search of a problem. The second one is the practice or the technology or the intervention actually market ready. Many times they're not. The third one is the alignment and co-creation. And what we mean by that is, if you drop a project in northern Ghana, for example, and you've never enrolled a community, or you deploy a new video editing software and your user base, you've never socialized this product with your intended target constituent that are successful for the success of your product. So there's no co-creation. I've got reams and reams of examples. Google Glass was a good example of that, where the product was not socialized, co-created, and adopted by the target constituency. So it's a real problem. The next one is obviously the standard one, which is the team, the partners. The requirements of the project or the initiative, are they clearly mapped to the core competencies of the teams? Lots of times they're blind spots. People think they know everything because they're excellent at coding or designing distributed ledger, but they may know nothing about policy. So there are these blind spots. The next one is reporting and measurement and reporting. Lots of people don't know how to actually rigorously report the impact that the investment is doing. They treat it as an afterthought. That's a red flag. The next one is policy alignment. Are they addressing the relevant policies and regulations that could stumble them? this might seem intuitive to people, but we've seen companies end up in a position where what they're proposing to do in a particular initiative is deemed illegal. They haven't done their homework. They've got no mitigation and whatever. And then the biggest one, the seventh element, is the element what we call payers. And this is one we see over and over, and that is people spend a lot of time figuring out what they're going to build, figuring out how they're going to bring it to market, figuring out the regulation, figuring out all the other 6 elements, but they have failed to determine whether there are willing and able payers for the thing that they're going to build. And so whenever people come to us and they say, we're developing this incredible satellite technology that we're going to deploy, and it's going to do amazing granularity. And the first question we ask them is, forget everything, forget the 6. Just tell us how you've determined that you've got willing and able payers. Show us the traction. Have you got LOIs, MOUs, offtake agreements, investment commitments, purchase orders, whatever it is, just tell us what it is. And I would say 60-70% of people that come to us who are very committed and passionate about the solution they're developing haven't figured out the payer section. So that's a long answer to your question again, but there are 7 elements that consistently show up. Doesn't matter whether it's a project, doesn't matter whether it's a company, it doesn't matter whether it's an initiative or an NGO. These 7 are really proving to me quite reliable in determining which way the outcome's going to go.
You mentioned that the 7th one seemed to be of the most priority. Do you sort of take a diagnostic approach where you look at a business or a project and see which of them need the most attention? Or is there sort of an order of operations to the 7 or a priority order for them?
Yeah, good question. So very briefly, in the 7, what we call the problem and the payer have the heaviest weight at 15 points. The maximum they can get is 15 points. And then the partners, which is at the top of we've arranged these 7 in an archway. So at the top of the arch, you've got a keystone that's made up of your team, that's 10 points. And then the other elements are 5 points. So there's a priority weighting. What happens is that people go through our online predictive analytics platform, Traro, which is Latin for to filter, and they provide their narrative response to these questions. And then our predictive analytics framework basically scores, ranks, and provides the narrative back to them and say, good job here, this is a room for improvement. What that allows us to do is that we can take an investment opportunity in Seychelles, a wind project in India, a peatland project in Northern Ireland, and we can compare them. Like we can compare, it doesn't matter what the sector, it doesn't matter what the geography is, it doesn't matter how long they've been in business, nothing, because the predictive analytical framework that we develop reliably allows comparability, side-by-side comparison, and also because of the scoring, pinpoints where they're the most weak. So you'll find one, for example, scores 2 out of 10 on the team, on the keystone element, the top element in the arch. We say to the investors, here's the problem. Like if you want to insert surgically investment to fix this problem, then the project's great. Or you need to spend some time on product market fit validation, the payers piece. They've got no idea whether they're going to sell anything. So it's a very surgical tool. If you've read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, you'll recognize what I'm describing. He calls it thin slicing. That's exactly what it is. The 20% of the metrics that are going to dictate 80% of the outcome. That's what Traro is. It's a thin slicing frame.
This has been a great conversation. When we get back from break, I'm curious, you've talked a lot about what I call general strategies, and I think semantically, someone could pick another word, but they're sort of timeless. They're things that you could drop you into any century, and that these will work for enterprise. And then also the other sort of challenge that businesses are dealing with, sort of the tactic, the specifics of how do we modify it for today's marketplace or today's technology. And so I'd love to get your feedback, and we're going to get into that right after this quick break. Hey, y'all, today's episode is brought to you by Amplify Media, and we are a podcast and content production company. Well, we like to think of ourselves as like the fractional media part of your company. Because chances are, if you're listening to this, you probably have a product, a passion, a mission, a message, something you're trying to get out to the world, but you might not have the time, the team, or the tech skills to be able to do it. Well, if that's the case, we can help. Go to amplifymedia.com. That's AMPLAFY media.com. Show notes for the link. And with that, let's get back to Sean. So Sean, we've spent the first part of the conversation really diving into some timeless strategies. And I mentioned that someone could listen to this episode in 2025, 2035, 2055, and I think it'll all be out. I'm curious, though, about how you guys are adjusting to whatever adjustments you're being forced to make, whether that's market conditions, whether that's tariff and policy conditions, technology is moving at such a big rate. What are the things that you are sort of being forced to adjust to, and what sort of adjustments are you finding yourself?
Yeah, I think the biggest adjustment, as we're all dealing with it, is the integration and harnessing of AI, not only in our own business, but also as it relates to our clients that we work with. So we work with clients obviously in the US, in Europe, Africa, South America, Oceania. And it's kind of an interesting thing. So just a bit of context. Whenever we finish a client engagement on the climate finance consultancy side, we always send a closeout survey that's, asks them, how did we do? What did you like? What didn't you like? So on, so on. And we've been doing this for several years now. And what started happening was we started picking out a particular thread in the testimonials, which succinctly boiled down to one word, which is trust. Our clients really trust us. We're straight up, we're transparent, we're ethical, we own our mistakes, and we go beyond. Why is this relevant to your question? Because it is feasible to think that clients who ask us a question, I was just on a telephone call for about an hour. I was in an Uber in Paris. Someone needed to talk to us. Spent an hour talking to these people, answering questions around the carbon market, the carbon climate policy, the movement around the Paris Agreement, what happened at the Conference of the Party in Belém in Brazil, and so on. And my wife was in the car because we were going for a weekend there. And I hung up and she said, I don't get it. Like, why are they asking you these questions? Because she could hear my responses. And she's like, why don't they just ChatGPT it, And this is an interesting thing, is that even though we have this wealth of information literally on the other end of an app, people, they don't know what they can believe. I think that's where we all are with AI. It's kind of convenient, but we're always told to check the references. And when people engage us, they're essentially saying, we understand that we have all these resources, but we need to be able to trust you. We do trust you, and so we're coming back to you. Just for context, 80% of our client book are repeat clients. Repeat clients, 80%. It means they keep coming back over and over. But, that said, adjusting to AI in all its forms, it is a challenge, especially in the way that, we create content, as you know. We have our weekly and monthly newsletters. We do our own podcast, Untangling Climate Finance. And, AI helps with speed. But I think for me, as the principal of the company, I want to make sure that trust is never compromised, that the integrity is not compromised. And so we use it judiciously, I would say that. I think the challenge is that when you've got somebody who's looking at potentially working with you and they're on the other end of the Zoom call and everything you're saying, they're basically corroborating with ChatGPT, it can become challenging, because you're not actually having a dialogue. You're responding to his latest ChatGPT prompt, like ask him this, double check that. That doesn't sound right. And I find that, it's challenging, right? It's definitely a new paradigm.
Well, yeah, I think there was such a large volume of data that the information was trained on to get us up to this point. And now the amount of new information is obviously much more scarce. And so I think that if there is an opportunity for business leaders, especially those that are willing to create content media, to sort of be on the cutting edge, I think it does create an opportunity for them to establish that trust as opposed to, just parroting whatever they get out of their ChatGPT.
Right. Yeah. The other thing that's moving that influences what we do specifically on the climate finance business, of course, is, the world of climate is becoming polarized. The current administration, it's definitely not helping. And so we've definitely had to adjust to really focusing on growing client relationships outside of the US, so in Europe and Africa and South America. It's kind of odd. We sort of live in this surreal world where we've got obviously our colleagues in the US who are in this space are still dialed in, but many people are reacting negatively to the sort of pressure to take their foot off the climate gas pedal, climate mitigation pedal. And that's problematic. And then you have a conversation with somebody in Europe or even in Northern Africa, and it's pedal to the metal for them, And so I find that quite interesting, this dichotomy that's happening before our eyes.
Yeah, it seems like the shift, and I've only been in business for, I guess now, almost 2 decades, which, I was fortunate enough to get into, start my first business right out of high school. And so you sort of go through these cycles, and it seems like the cyclical nature of things is accelerating so much to where, businesses, they had a little bit of a runway before things really changed a lot. And I just don't think that businesses have that luxury as much anymore with the rate of change.
Yeah, well, what it's doing, I think my impression of that is it's forcing us, if you've read Good to Great, which I'm sure you have, I think it's putting even more acute relevance and attention on a business's hedgehog, focusing on the one thing that you can truly be the best at in the world, or with what the world will miss if you didn't exist, right? Because in days of yore, where opportunity was rife and competition wasn't as stiff and the world wasn't moving as fast, one could entertain a number of different plates in the air, but that's becoming unwise. And so even in the climate finance business that I've got, we've gone from 9 service offerings to 3 core ones. Those 3 core ones are laddered. So client comes in on number 1, we escalate them to 2, 3, classical thing, but it's very focused, it's very contained, it's very structured, and it allows us to say we're the best in the world at this particular thing. And I think a lot of organizations need to do that. In the climate tech space, the climate development space, carbon space, whatever you want to call it, unfortunately, there are a lot of great organizations that have stumbled on not having a hedgehog. So they've tried different business models. Nobody actually knew what their business model was. As a result, nobody knew when to call them. No one knew when to pick up the phone. I think that is a timeless piece of attention that's needed no matter what business you start. I mean, in our functional beverage company, our proposition is very clear. We only do functional. We only do clean. That's all we do, nothing else. When people come and tell us, can you do this for 200,000 units, but we want you to add sucrose and all sorts of, we're just going to, that's not what we want to be known for. And I think it takes a lot of, as you know, you've been around, it takes a bit of discipline to turn that down.
For sure. I've chased my shiny objects. And also, I think that I see the conversation happening with a lot of young people in the sense of, what sort of advice do you give a young person when they're trying to choose their career or they're getting into the workforce, with AI and the way that it's happening. And I see the same sort of conversation happening for businesses in the sense of how do they sort of position or reposition or niche down into a space that is going to be viable in, not even 5 years, but in 18 months from now. I think it's a very important conversation that businesses need to have.
Yeah, I do. Just on that point for young people trying to figure out what to do, like everybody, we all drank the Kool-Aid, which is find your purpose, find your passion, follow it, and do that as long as you can be in service to the world. And I'm not negating that, but I will tell you the advice I gave to I have 4 children, I gave it to my 2 older kids who are thankfully doing, following it. And this is how I think, I wish my dad had told me this, but when you envisage your lifestyle, whatever lifestyle it is, you want to be a nomad, you want to live in a city, whatever it is, think of your ideal lifestyle, then figure out what it is that you can do to support that lifestyle where you have a purpose. All right. So it's a little bit reoriented. And interestingly, I'll use my son as an example. He didn't want a 9-to-5 job. He didn't want to be in the rat race. He knew everything he didn't want to do. It wasn't exactly clear what he wanted to do, but he also knew he's a surfer. He does yoga. He's a very spiritual guy, and he wants to see the world. Anyway, long story short, he went to Nepal, did his 700-hour yoga instructor training, is now teaching at the yoga resorts around the world, beautiful locations. He's basically a nomad, doesn't work behind a desk, gets paid well, has a great reputation, and he helps people and loves it. And I think that's, I would say in my work, when I founded Gordian Knot Strategies, one of the best things that happened, despite it being horrible, was COVID, because we shut down the office and suddenly I was free. And we sold everything, bought a boat, and I ran the 2 businesses for 3 years from the boat. My family, my 2 younger kids and my wife and I were sailing, running the boat from the helm of at that time, I remember I was on a Zoom call with a client. I was like, I am living a lifestyle where my job can support this type of lifestyle. It was like the most fantastic 3 years ever. So anyway, that's my advice to.
Well, I think that's a great note to leave it on. I have 2 more questions, though. The first is, if people want to find out more about you, about Gordian Knot, where's the best place for people to go?
Yeah, GordianKnotStrategies.com or on LinkedIn under my name, Sean Penrith. Yeah, accessible, easy to reach out.
And we'll link those up in the show notes for the listeners, as always. And my last question, which I give to all the guests, Sean, is in your opinion, what is the secret to scaling a business?
Yeah, that is a good one. I'm going to share my result, my opinion on this, but it's an opinion not of my own creation, but of my own learning, I suppose. Because 10 years ago, if you had asked me, I would have said something I'm sure you've heard many times, which is just, stay consistent, be diligent, just keep pushing, like just don't give up, right? And I've done that all my life. And if I had to summarize my modus operandi, it would be I grind. I'm a grinder. Like I grind hard, And in the last 4 or 5 years, I've pondered whether that's the best method. And I've come to the conclusion that to successfully build and scale a business has to start at a much more fundamental level than I'm just going to be disciplined. I'm going to outwork everyone. I'm going to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, not 4 o'clock, and all that stuff. And I think it has to do with mindset. And I think my background is I had to overcome a lot of limiting beliefs from my childhood, which I didn't even recognize. It took me a long time to figure all that out. But when you start unpacking your limiting beliefs and transforming them into empowering beliefs, it is very, very powerful at moving you a lot faster to where you want to go. I'm not talking about law of attraction stuff and all that. I'm talking about pure energy alignment between what you feel and project and how you comport yourself in the world, I suppose, and the ability to do things essentially that we're scared of. One guy who I listened to, he said it great. Fear is false evidence appearing real. And that's the mindset I'm talking about. It holds all of us back from the greatness that's within us. I mean, it did me for many years when I was a lot younger. And so to answer your question, it's mindset, really understanding limiting beliefs, transforming them into powerful beliefs, and then acting on those powerful beliefs.